A double blow for Thailand's former Prime Minister Yingluck. The military government has impeached her and banned her from politics. It will now pursue criminal charges that could carry a 10-year jail sentence. Is this the death of democracy in the country, as Yingluck charges, or are her opponents right when they hail this as the start of a new era of reform? Hello, I'm Taimur Nabili. You're watching Between the Lines. Now, it really didn't come as much of a surprise when Thailand's National Legislative Assembly impeached the former Prime Minister Yingluck last week on charges of dereliction of duty over her ousted government's controversial rice pledging scheme. The military-appointed legislature voted 190 to 18 to ban her from politics for 5 years. And the Attorney General's office is now also proceeding with criminal charges against her, alleging corruption also related to that scheme. If found guilty, she could receive a custodial sentence of up to 10 years. Now, these developments are just the latest twist in a saga of Thailand's tumultuous political system, and particularly in the fate of the Shinawatra clan. This particular phase began about 10 years ago when Yingluck's brother, Thaksin, was also ousted as Prime Minister, also prosecuted by a nominated body of his opponents, and then driven into exile. Well, since then, the country's bitter political divisions have grown only worse. When the military seized power in a coup last May, the generals promised to promote reconciliation. But are the prospects for unity coming any closer with these latest moves? On the programme tonight, I'm joined from Bangkok by Dr. Panitan Wattanayagorn, who's the National Security Advisor to Thailand's current Deputy Prime Minister. He's also Associate Professor at the Department of International Relations at the Chulalongkorn University. From London, Verapat Pariawong is a visiting scholar at SOAS at the University of London, and he was a previous special counsel to the former Deputy Prime Minister, the one in the Yingluck administration. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme today. Let me begin with you, Mr. Panitan, if I might. What was the purpose of impeaching the former Prime Minister Yingluck?
I think the case is an old case. Took place during the Yingluck administration. She was charged with the wrongdoings or corruption charges under the rice scheme. This administration is now taking forward this case. It is about legal responsibility and political responsibility of an elected government officers in the program, which is known to be problematic. But of course, debates are very much centered on the political incentive alone. But you have other issues like transparency, accountability, and legal cases as well.
There may be those issues raised by the rice pledging scheme, and a lot of people would agree that it was a problematic scheme. But impeaching and then prosecuting the former Prime Minister under the circumstances in which has been done has raised a number of questions. And my question to you is there a political motive to this? What are they hoping to achieve in going after the former Prime Minister?
I think the government or the legislative want to make sure that normal function resume, all cases proceed forward unfair and free, as much as you can under the current circumstances. Surprisingly also, surveys done by various polls, particularly on the north and the northeast, indicated that 67% of Kun Yingluck supporters done by Northeast University Khon poll indicated that they don't mind if the case proceeds forward on corruption charges, as long as it is fair to the ex-Prime Minister. I think from that notion, I think the current government has no choice but to make sure that these cases proceed forward normally in a normal process.
But it isn't a normal process, is it? I mean, an opinion poll in the country is surely not the basis upon which to go after a former Prime Minister, particularly one who had left office before the charges were even brought, particularly under the circumstances which the Constitution under which she's being charged is no longer in operation. And there's a whole lot of questions to be answered here, and it smacks a bit of politics, doesn't it?
Certainly, certainly. Normal process may not be under the democratic process at this time, but the government argues that these cases are proceeding forward according to rules and regulations that already existed during the Yingluck administration. In other words, they have not done anything very unusual, except, of course, the members of the National Assembly were appointed. And that's a big challenge for the opposition, which do not agree with this, because they think that these people cannot be impartial. But in the end, you need to look at the biggest issue, that is wishes of the people in Thailand, regardless of political affiliations, to have the elected officials becoming responsible, more responsible for the national scheme, national program that went very wrong.
Mr. Verapat, your thoughts on all of that?
I think Dr. Panitan is absolutely right that we have to look at this from the point of view where we need to ensure in a democracy, politicians must be held accountable and charges of corruption must be investigated. But I think Dr. Panitan is missing a very big point there, that the mere fact that we are imposing a very undemocratic and the lack of due process on Ms. Yingluck or anyone else is actually severely hampering the attempts to restore democracy and the attempts to ensure that politicians in Thailand are held accountable. Why? Simply because, and I've said this many times, simply because by imposing this coup installed National Assembly members to vote against Yingluck will only ensure that the people in Thailand are more deeply rooted in the conflicts, in the sense that there is no justice going on in Thailand, there is no respect of rule of law. How can you basically expect a military coup that ousted a civilian elected government to basically install their own people and say this is going to be a fair and impartial procedure? I think no one can actually believe that. I seriously doubt if Ajahn Panitan actually believes that it is correct for the National Assembly members installed by military regime to have a say to impeach the once elected politician. The fact of the matter is, when we talk about political impeachment, first of all, it has to be done by representatives of the people, because the people decide who they vote in, the people decide who the representative will vote out. The second issue is you cannot retroactively impeach a politician who has already left office. Ms. Yingluck has already left office, and she said in her statement 3 times, by disbanding, by dissolution of the House of Parliament, by the verdict of the Constitutional Court, and again by the military coup. And how can we expect politicians who has already left office to be impeached again? So that raises a very flagging alarm for the political motive. Last but not least, I think, if you look at the substantive issues in this case, when we talk about a rice pledging scheme that has caused tremendous financial spending, we have to separate the issue. Whether it's a bad or good policy is up to debate, but whether this is something that could be considered a potential possible impeachment is totally different story. Otherwise, we can look at Obamacare in the United States. President Obama spends lots of money to help the poor to get health insurance. Can we impeach President Obama simply because the U.S. is spending too much money? Or what about the cap policy, the agricultural subsidy policy in the European Union? I think that looking at this from a very holistic picture, just like what Ajahn Panitan said, I think this is a purely politically motivated attempt to remove the Shinawatra clan from politics. And let me say this before I return the question to you. This is not about the Shinawatra clan. 10 years from now, I don't know where the Shinawatra is going to be, but 10 years from now, so long as we don't have justice and respect of rule of law in Thailand, we're going to end up here discussing about the next politicians being done this and that, and the politics will never be a progress towards peace and reconciliation, because in the end the people cannot accept the injustice that happened in Thailand.
Just clarify for me very quickly, there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction, at least in my understanding of what you just said. You're saying that everything that has happened to Yingluck has been completely outside of due process and a free and fair rule of law and political democratic system, and yet on the other hand you're saying something should have been done about her at the same time. So how would you have approached the problem that you yourself raised, and that is in order to hold politicians accountable? How could that have been achieved if not in the way that's been done?
There is no contradiction at all. What I've said is I'm specifically referring to the system where we don't accept coup d'etat and military intervention. So we need to make sure the civil societies, journalists, academics in Thailand work together with the politicians, perhaps with Ajahn Paditan, perhaps with the Democrat Party, to ensure that there's accountability in place. And there was in fact investigation going on pending before the military coup. There were in fact court cases filed and successfully terminated the prime ministership of Yingluck Shinawatra. Although those cases are highly dubious in terms of substance and procedure, it's at least better than to have a military coup installing their own people and basically say this is the impeachment. And I think there is no contradiction at all. What is actually contradicting is actually, I think, coming from Ajahn Paditan to say that, well, we need to ensure that the politicians must be checked, that there must be no corruption. But in the end, in essence, corruption at the highest level comes from the military coup itself. You basically tear down the whole constitution.
All right, let's put that to Mr. Panitan.
The law in Thailand, and you disrespect the votes of the people.
Mr. Panitan, response, please.
Yes, I think before we accuse others of corruption, you must have the proof. I think Ajahn Virapat is correct that Prime Minister Yingluck is also needs to prove herself in court. It's still a long legal process. But of course, to say that under the military coup in Thailand 13 times already, it is an unfortunate situation. But all things are wrong, all things are bad. Only under the democratic system, things should be much more acceptable. I think that in principle, that's yes. But in reality, I think we know very well that Thailand and many other countries in East Asia in particular are far from perfect in terms of democracy. Some of them are not even a democratic country. But yet, accountability, transparency must go on. In certain countries,
the substantive point here, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. The substantive point here is not that accountability should not be a priority here, but the manner in which it is being administered is the problem. And it's not just Mr. Verapan who's making that point. I mean, the point has been outlined, and let me just put to you the latest and perhaps most high-profile person to make that point, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, Daniel Russell, who said only this week, when an elected leader is removed from office, deposed and impeached by our authorities, and when a political leader is then targeted with criminal charges at a time when democratic processes and institutions are interrupted, the international community is going to be left with the impression that these steps could in fact be politically driven. And that's the point, isn't it? What's happening in Thailand is not a due process or a rule of law or an accountability of the former Prime Minister. It's an attempt to cripple her and the party and the people that support her, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, of course, you need to look at the real situation on the ground, too. What happens if this case is not moving forward? There are a lot of people who are saying that this government may very well be sided with one side. I think the best thing is to, of course, push this case forward to the court. And in order to do that, I think some kind of progress must be done at the assembly. I think this is the case. And I think in general, the majority of the Thai people have supported this process. But of course, the final decision. Well,
sorry to interrupt again. You keep saying that the majority of the people supported this process. The actual fact is that the majority of people have voted for Yingluck and her party again and again and again.
Look at the poll, please. Look at the polls. Look at the polls first. You have to look at the polls. You have to look at the wishes of the people, regardless of what under the circumstances. You cannot claim. You need to look at the real number. 67% of the people supported this in the Northeast. 8% of the people do believe that this is politically driven. 8% only among the Thaksin supporters. This is the latest poll happening today.
Mr. Verapan, how would you interpret an opinion poll conducted by the current government versus an open election that elected the person in question?
Well, whether the poll is conducted by the government or by Konkan University, the fact of the matter is there is no freedom of expression in Thailand right now. And how can you expect the people to speak freely or to even receive the complete information from the people who are supposed to be reporting, criticizing and providing objective different point of views? Let me just give you clear examples. Yesterday, when the former Foreign Minister of Thailand, Surapong Tojakchaikul, came out and gave interviews about the points made by Mr. Russell, the U.S. representative visiting Thailand, he's now being summoned. The former foreign minister of Thailand is now being summoned by the military regime. So there is a climate of fear going on in Thailand. The media is being censored, and I don't think it's meaningful for us to point to one particular poll or the other. If you want a poll, then let's have a free and fair election. That's what was going on last year when we were advocating for fair and free election to move towards reform. But again, the military didn't help to stop those protesters on the streets who interfered and prevented election from going on. And I think we have to go back to a sense and a very core principle that what Ajahn Pradithan and I agree with. We need to ensure that there's accountability. We need to fight corruption. But Ajahn Pradithan made a very important point. We've had tremendous amount of time and experience on the coup d'etats in Thailand. This is probably countless times that we're going to see them again. But what has happened? We have had 12, 13 effective coups in Thailand, but it hasn't resolved any political problems in Thailand. It adds more political problems. Why? Simply because when people elect a politician into office, whether that politician is bad or good, the people expect themselves to be able to judge for themselves, not to be judged by a military regime. And that will bring us back, whether the Shinawatras are gone in 10 years or not, it's going to bring Thailand back on this problem as long as we don't have justice in Thailand.
Look, there will theoretically be a meaningful poll in Thailand this year. The military have promised there'll be a referendum on their constitutional amendments. We'll talk about whether that might make a difference and whether it could spell the end of the Shinawat clan in Thai politics. Coming up after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Yingluck Shinawat's Phua Thai party has promised not to retaliate against the political ban that's been imposed on the ousted leader. And the party says it can survive without the Shinawat family at its helm. But how much influence does the clan have left, and what might the future of Thai politics look like without them? Still on the programme, Dr. Panitan Watanayagon, National Security Advisor to Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister. Also, Verapat from London joining us is Verapat Pariyawong, visiting scholar at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Gentlemen, thanks again for being with us. Verapat, let me just begin with you. If we do see a referendum on the next constitution, will it be meaningful? You've already criticised the process by which everything has taken place. This constitution that comes up is going to be entirely drafted and put together by an unelected bunch of people, all with a very narrow prism of interests. So analyse for us what you think will happen over the course of this next year between now and the promise of democratic elections.
A general election sometimes next year, but I don't think it's clear yet that we will have a referendum on the new so-called constitution. I think, first of all, we have to look at the fact that we had experience before. Look at the last coup in 2006, which produced a constitution in 2007. What happened after we had that constitution? We had attempts by the civilian elected governments to try to peacefully amend the constitution so that it's become more democratic in nature. For instance, they try to amend the constitution so that the Senate are fully elected instead of half appointed. But then those attempts to amend the constitution resulted in political conflicts. So I think in the end, despite the fact that this constitution will be perfect or not, it will produce long-term conflicts that will follow simply because there's a lack of legitimacy and there's an attempt, a very clear attempt, to make sure that the people's power will not be transferred to political parties to run the country. I think it's important for us to have checks and balance to make sure that whoever gets into power in Thailand must be under checks and balance. But to simply say, okay, from now on, the courts will be able to do this and that and decide on behalf of the people without respecting the people's choice in terms of political policy, I think that's a very dangerous road lying ahead for us.
Mr. Panitan, in the first half, you spoke about the necessity for accountability, for listening to the will of the people. But what we've heard so far about what this new constitution will consist of seems to point very much towards a new constitution that is determined and executed by an unelected and very narrow interest group. Is that in line with the kind of values you were talking about?
Could you repeat the question again, please?
What we've heard about the way the new constitution is being framed suggests that it's being given or is being almost entirely determined by unelected politicians that have been nominated by one man almost entirely, the General Prayuth. So when you were saying in the first half that Thailand needs accountability and to serve the will of the people, I'm wondering whether this new constitution will deliver that.
Well, I think the drafters of the Constitution, many of them have drafted one of the most respected constitutions, 1997 Constitution, which is deemed to be most democratic, and many of them came back drafting yet another constitution in hope that they will address some of the deficiencies, they will address some of the loopholes, and they will make sure that they achieve a right balance between 3 or 4 branches. It's very interesting to see many interesting ideas being proposed. Reduction of the powers of the courts is one never been done before in many years. Rights to many minorities, including women and others, have been introduced. And importantly, under this, Ajahn Thirapat may be very worried. Under this martial law, the suggestions that we could elect the Prime Minister and cabinet members directly from the floor, directly from the provinces, are also among these choices on the table. Yes, it's not under a democratic rule at this time, but look at these real issues on the table. I think we have achieved some of the perhaps more representatives in many fronts, but of course it's still far from over until April or May before the final solution on the draft is decided. And in the end, referendum argued by the drafters should be held. I think the NCPO, the military, and the cabinet may have to take this seriously, but the drafters of the constitution want this new constitution to be voted by the people.
All right.
So this suggests that it's not democratic, but yes, you have many democratic principles built into it. In the end, ask yourself, can a country in the world right now not adopting many democratic values and principles in the current circumstances and be acceptable to the world? I don't think so. I think in the Thai case, we do that, but we need to do it in the Thai characteristics. We need to do that according to our own wishes.
Mr. Verapat, it seems as if, as you said earlier on, that the current military government has managed to at least exclude a lot of the contradictory voices in this conversation, and you said they've cowed the opposition to a certain extent. If they do get rid of Yingluck, as they have done of Thaksin, and expunge the Shinawatra influence in Thailand, is this the end of the opposition movement? Is this the end of the red shirts? Is this the end of populism within Thailand?
I will come back to that question, but I just like to point out that Ajahn Beditan said that we need to be realistic about the true wishes of the Thai people. Then have the say back to the Thai people. Let the Thai people have the say what's going on. Lift the martial law, allow critics, allow journalists to speak their minds, and then we will know precisely what the Thai people want in the new constitution. Now back to your question, I don't think anyone's going to be able to get rid of Shinawatras now. Why? Look at the history. For the past decade, Thaksin Shinawatra has been forced to live mostly in exile for the past decade, and he hasn't gone away from Thai politics. He's become even more dominant, more relevant in every context of Thai politics. Why? Is it because he's gifted? Is it because he's a great politician? He's an innocent man? No, I don't think he's necessarily a great or an innocent man. That's up to him to prove himself. But what is true to us right now is that the more you impose unjust procedures against a politician, the more sympathy he will receive from the people, the red shirts. And again, the process is now being repeated against Yingluck. So I think what the junta and the anti-democratic establishment is doing right now is to increase the popularity of the Shinawatra clan. And that's problematic because we're not going to see new faces in Thai politics.
Well, interestingly you say that, but we've not heard a word from Thaksin or indeed for any of the red shirts. But unfortunately, that's a conversation for a different day because we've run out of time on this particular program. Thank you very much indeed to my guest, Dr. Panitan Watanayagon in Thailand, also Verapat Pariyawong in London. That's it for tonight's program. On Thursday,